welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. My name is Brian Perez, and happy Good Friday. If you're listening to the radio right now, this program is not live. We recorded it yesterday. You're hearing it on the radio on Good Friday, April 7th. We're not live today. If you have a question for us, write it down so you don't forget it. Give us a call on Monday. We're going to be live on Monday the 10th. We're normally not live on Mondays, but we will be this coming Monday, so we'd love to hear from you then. If you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube on Thursday as we record this episode, this is the last episode. Two things. The last episode with Pastor Brian Brodersen for about a week and a half, and also the last time you can ask your questions about Good Friday and Easter, because next time we're live, it'll be past Good Friday and Easter. So call us today with your questions. The number is right there on the bottom of your screen. And answering your questions today, we've got Brian Brodersen, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California. You also hear Brian on the Back to Basics radio program. And joining us here in the studio, Phil Metzger from Calvary San Diego, not on Skype today, but in the studio. Always good to see you here, Phil.
I'm so glad to be here. I love getting to come up and be with you guys.
How's the drive up? Like an hour and a half, 2 hours?
It's an hour and a half.
Okay.
At this time of day, it's fine.
Okay.
If I tried to go home right now, I'd be there for 3 hours.
Yeah. Forget about it.
It's the most beautiful drive that you hate with all of your being, because you're just stuck. It's beautiful. You got PCH the whole way. It's awesome, but I hate traffic. So we hang out here for a couple hours, hang out with our family up in Orange County, and then drive home. Hour and a half, no big deal.
Very good. Bobby Conway will be joining us in a little bit as well, but we've got lots of questions here on the screen that we're going to get to right now. Did you have something you wanted to say? I think you did. I can tell.
I just,
it looks like it.
Just this sort of ominous announcement about the last time you were able to ask me a question.
Yeah.
I mean, Phil got really worried.
I was nervous.
when you said that.
I was like,
now, I go all kinds of places. I travel all the time, but for some reason, this one's really got you sensing that there's
I just said for a week and a half.
No, but it was the pause. It was like a pregnant pause. Like, this is the last episode with Brian Brodersen. Pause. For a week and a half.
I think I wanted to freak people out.
Yeah,
No.
You got
I
us.
didn't mean to do that. Sorry.
I thought you were actually
Prophesying
firing me on air.
yeah.
No,
This was
never.
the
Never.
last time.
And that's why I'm here today, Brian. I'm sorry, but you have been removed. Bobby and I are staging a coup.
After the chicken pecking PhD conversation.
That was the last straw.
That was the last straw.
Wow, I missed it.
You missed it.
I was driving, and I wasn't in the car. I wasn't in the car at the time of 3 to 4, so I missed it.
You missed it, yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll give you a little hint.
Yeah.
Richard Dawkins.
Okay.
Look up what his PhD was in,
Okay.
and you'll be amused.
Okay. I'm doing it now. Now I'm like, I can't help myself.
Or you can do what everybody else is going to do and go look for the April 6th first hour episode of Pastor's Perspective. We archive them all on Facebook and YouTube and Spotify. You found it.
Yes.
What is it?
Zoology?
Well, a little more in
His
depth.
dissertation.
Oh,
specifically.
okay. Okay, all right.
Bobby remembers.
Bobby knows.
Yeah.
Oh,
Basically,
yeah.
does a chicken peck at domesticated chicks or something?
Here,
like
it's
that.
the title is Selective Pecking in the Domestic Chick.
Yeah.
There's a lot we could do with that.
This is a guy who rules the world of science.
Shows how interested we were.
Yeah. You guys must have been amazing last hour.
All right. So give us a call with your questions. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to start with one on the phone here. Richard in California. What is up, Richard?
Hi. My question has to do with the recent shootings at the Christian school in Nashville, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I read on the internet, it seemed like the shooter was a transvestite person who was targeting Christians. And then I read some other stuff where...
Transvestite or transgender?
I'm sorry, transgender.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure the proper terminology. My mistake. Anyway, my daughter goes to a Christian school here in California, and actually they changed their security policy a couple of days after that happened. So my question is more of like the regular Christian, a person like myself, how should we, since there was a kind of like a statement of violence from transgenders towards Christians, because we don't kind of like, at least the Bible, says that we don't support necessarily that lifestyle, and they're really upset about that, and they kind of want to hurt us. What's the proper response for just a regular Christian?
Brian, what do you say?
Well, this was a single incident with a girl who was identifying as a male who had a history with that school. And so this was, more specifically somewhat of a vendetta against that, her own upbringing and her parents, and not accepting her new identity as a male and so forth. So I don't think we should at all jump to the conclusion that means that everybody who is transgender has a plan or is on some sort of a mission to hurt Christians or take Christians out. I don't think that's the case at all. So I don't think we should. There are people who are saying that, and there might even be certain activists that are encouraging kinds of things, those kinds of things. I mean, we live in a crazy world. 3/4 of the people on Twitter are crazy, and they say all kinds of crazy stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised that those kinds of narratives are out there. But I think that as Christians, we don't need to get all worked up about it. We don't need to be paranoid that, oh no, there's a trans person that's after me. I don't think that's the case at all. If you are like I am and Phil is, both of us, we have schools. And so we've taken precautionary measures. I mean, this isn't the first school shooting. We all know that. There have been many. But this has just kind of reminded us again that it is a dangerous world, and there are violent people, unstable people out there. So we made an effort to up our security ourselves. And so I think that's just the prudent thing to do, the wise thing to do. But in the end, we have to trust the Lord. We believe that God is with us, and He's going to watch over us, and we're just that's the best we can do. Do our part, do our due diligence, and then leave the rest in God's hands.
Amen.
What do you think?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Like, we both have, our churches have schools.
Yeah.
And of course, the moment that happens, we all reconsider, okay, what's our security protocols? But I know from you guys, and I know for us, and I think this is probably all across the country, it wasn't because we were fearing transgenders. Right. It was, there are people out there who've got bones to pick. Yeah. And so I would say to you, Richard, we got to remember, cooler heads need to prevail. We don't need to let the narrative of the worst case scenario become the norm. It's not the norm. Yep. This was a person who was very unstable. There's obviously more issues going on than transgenderism. That's an identity. That's a gender topic. That certainly doesn't define why somebody would go in and do what they did. Yeah, exactly. So there was more. There was disturbance there, and there was more. But we wanna just keep on keeping cool, trust in the Lord, believing that God knows what He's going to do with each one of our lives.
Richard, thanks for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. Bobby, did you want to chime in?
No, I just wonder about the psyche of just anybody doing this kind of crime. And again, I'm not even thinking in relationship to the transgender issue, just how people get to that place. I mean, it's incredible how often this is happening. And I think about some of the causes that you hear, but some people want to say violent video games, and I go, yeah, but I mean, I don't feel like if I played violent video games, it's going to make me want to do that. I think that there's some people that could be more susceptible to things than others, but it's as if they weren't susceptible to it before the 90s. And so it's just so bizarre what's going on. And I really don't this is where I feel like there's got to be some kind of a demonic aspect to this, because to wake up and just think, I'm going to go just shoot a 6-year-old girl or a 9-year-old boy. I mean, it'd be like, what's going through your head while you're driving to the school? Like, I mean, it's just complete insanity at another level. And I can't get my head around it. So that's the part that I kind of find myself just tripping on, is the evil that is taking place right now in our country. It's powerful.
Yeah, boy, it is, and it's and the frequency of these shootings is just really, really, really concerning. It's getting worse, basically, and it's so complicated, and there's so many factors. And I think one thing I was thinking about this the other day. I think I was listening to a conversation between a few people on the topic as well, and I was thinking, in one sense, you've got you really do have now many people in this country who have no consciousness of God, or the sense that there is any kind of repercussion from God for sinful or evil behavior. So I think when you completely dismiss that, you kind of erase it from a culture for decades now, and it's almost like we're, that passage in Hosea, you've sown the wind and now you're reaping the whirlwind, so 30 years ago, these ideas were becoming more and more dominant in the culture, that there is no God that anyone's accountable to. Further back, we got to get rid of the 10 commandments in the classroom. One of the commandments, of course, is you shall not murder. So I think, and then the glorification of murder through, I think some video games do that for sure. But, you see it all over TV, all over the internet. It's just like the perfect storm in so many ways, so many different contributing factors. But the devil is obviously the mastermind behind these kinds of things. And usually, like I think this girl had a diary, she'd been planning it. She had all of her sort of ducks in a row, she's going to do it, and this is what she's going to do. And but and then there's the issue of guns. How does a person like this, who had a history of mental instability, how do they get access to weapons like that? Mm-hmm. That's another frightening aspect.
That's the factor that's changed from the 90s more than anything.
Yeah,
it's just a reality.
Yeah.
There's a lot of immoral countries in the world who don't have these problems. It's like, there's a point where we have to take it outside of the spiritual realm alone and just say, hey, our country needs to figure stuff out. Yeah. We won't answer that on Pastor's Perspective, but somebody's got to figure that stuff out.
Yeah. Richard, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. Now we're going to talk to, Elijah hung up. Call us back, Elijah. Let's go to Sandra. Welcome to the program, Sandra.
Hi, pastors. Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I have a question. I wake up every morning and I say a prayer, thanking the Lord for giving me another day. And I say the same prayer every day, and I wanted to know if that's okay. It's a prayer that I started with when I became a Christian, and then I kind of like added. But it's basically the same prayer because it covers everything that I want to say. But I just wanted to ask if it's okay to say the same prayer every day. I know it says something in the Bible where we shouldn't, so I wanted to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, Bobby, is this an example of vain repetition? What do you tell Sandra?
It could be, but it doesn't mean it is. I find that I get repetitious at times, and it is vain. I think that I'm just babbling in God's presence. In particular, when I pray for my food, a lot of times I hate that about myself. I mean, you eat several times a day, and it's hard to muster up this big moment with God. And so on one side, it's like, if I don't bow my head, then I'm worried that you think that I'm a pagan for not bowing my head. If I'm too short, then I worry that I'm disrespectful and didn't give God enough, of what he deserves, or I'm showing anxiousness to get to my meal because I'm so hungry. If I pray too long, then so it can be a very much of what they call a mind screw. I would say when you add the words that your prayers are getting longer, it made me wonder if there's some OCD stuff happening, because what can happen is for people with an OCD bent, they can add new prayers to the list, but they don't really know how to part ways with the old prayers. And so then they get vexed by prayer, and they feel like they have to walk through this very rote process. And then, God, I thank you for so-and-so, and I thank you for this, and I thank you for that, and oh my goodness, I forgot this. Oh wait, I prayed in the wrong order here. Let me start over. God, forgive me, Lord. Here we go again. And then we start kind of going about it again, and it can be a lot. So I'd say as long as your heart's in it and you're thinking about it, that's great. But guess what? None of our hearts are always in it. All of us, I think, can be sloppy at times in prayer. And so I know for me that my prayer is in need of a jump start when I wake up and I'm just totally rote. I just feel that I need to find breakthroughs in prayers and expand it and learn how to connect better. So that's what I'd offer.
What do you think, Sandra?
Yeah, he covered every single thing I was feeling. Exactly. And so he's right. I feel like I missed somebody in my prayer, or I missed something in my prayer. And the food part, he hit it right on the nail. I feel like guilty if I don't bow my head every time I eat throughout the day. So, it kind of like gets to me. And since I'm new, I don't know if that's correct or if God's telling me, okay, do something different.
Yeah, I would say, Sandra, just, simplify it. And the key is your heart. The key is sincerity. I mean, you can say a 3-second prayer with absolute sincerity that is perfectly acceptable to God. You can say a 20-minute prayer as long as your heart's in it. That's the thing, I think, to really simplify it. And then not to get condemned over feeling like, oh no, did I pray the right thing, or did I pray for that person? If you forgot to pray for a person, just say, oh yeah, Lord, and then that person too. That's part of the prayer. You're talking to your Father. You're talking to somebody who loves you, somebody who just delights to hear your voice, just delights to know that you're there to just communicate with him. So it just, simplify it.
So when it comes to, like Bobby said, praying before every meal, every time you eat. So what if it's like a snack? If you're just going to, do you have to say a prayer right then? People might be asking. Or when you go to the movies and you've got a big old bowl of popcorn in front of you.
What if you get a refill?
What if it's a refill? What if it's leftovers? What if it's, there's so many things to ponder here.
Bobby's freaking out, you
it's
guys.
Interesting.
Stop.
It's like
Bobby's freaking out right now.
Yeah, you're going to create like in other words, like, why can't you just back it up like this? Like, okay, well, if I can pray for my current meal, then why can't I just pray for all my meals at once for one day at a time?
Yes.
And if I could pray for all my meals for the whole day, can I pray for my meals for the week? Can I not pray for my meals for the month? But so how far do you roll it out to generalize it? But then how far back do you specify it where you're praying for every kernel of the popcorn?
Yes, exactly. Lord, thank you for this chip and this chip and this chip.
Wow.
Yeah.
This conversation.
And that grain of salt.
This conversation is getting very OCD.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes, it is.
Why am I feeling nervous?
Okay, but here's what I would say that can help. I would encourage perhaps for you to think about something of a prayer plan. And it's helped me at times to think, okay, every day I do want to pray for kind of my family. But what are some of those other areas? And so you want to make sure that you're praying for, like, your church and your nation, your work, maybe some non-believers. And what you can do is just think in terms of, to take the pressure off and to not get caught doing the same thing every day, maybe on Tuesdays you pray for missions, and on Wednesdays you pray for your country, and on Thursday you pray for your friends. And then in the midst of all that, you can be very spontaneous. And I get away from that, but I feel best about my prayer life when I feel more intentional, because I can measure where God's at in the midst of my prayers a lot better. Sometimes it gets real generalized. And so I would think when you're real specific, and then when a prayer gets answered that you've written down to pray on Tuesdays for the nation, let's say, then you can cross it off. But be specific enough that you can measure it. So don't just pray, God bless the nation. That's tough to measure, but pray for maybe a certain bill to get passed, or pray for, something that you're burdened about, that a representative could represent a school in a vote. And then when that comes to pass, scratch it off and then add something new. And that's the other thing. Give yourself the grace to go, what are 3 areas that I can pray for on each of these things? Because one thing that overwhelms me is when, as a pastor, I can't keep up with, like, people want us to pray sometimes as pastors. And I think that's great. And I'm honored by it, but it's tough to just keep up with everybody's prayer. Oh, pastor, be praying for this. And oh, my Aunt Gertrude, she has an ingrown toenail and they're having a heck of a time getting that thing out. Can you just pray that goes well? And I'm like, okay, I got to put that on my prayer guard, Gertrude's ingrown toenail. And then it just gets hard to manage that all. So how do you kind of do that?
How do you do it, Brian?
And do you have an Aunt Gertrude?
No, but I got an ingrown toenail. So I was sympathizing. Well, Sandra, is this helping, or is this making it even more complicated?
Please tell us it's helping. Please tell us it's helping
for you.
It's helping, because he hit another question that I wanted to ask is, how do you pray for each person that you have on your prayer list? I mean, you can't go through the whole list all included in the prayer, I guess. So that, I want to make it personal and not just go down the list every day.
Yeah. So there's something that really blessed me in reading through the New Testament, through Paul's letters specifically. Paul says on a number of occasions, he said, I make mention of you in my prayers. And I thought, I like that, a mention. I can just say, oh, Lord, and, Phil, I just pray for Phil today. Mm-hmm. And God knows what Phil needs. And so I just made a mention of him. So, yes, you're probably not the pastor of a church and have all day to just pray and read your Bible and study and think about spiritual things. You probably have a job and maybe a family and all that. So how do you do that and have a prayer life? Well, you just can go through your day and you just pray as things come up. Mm-hmm. You know, what I've been doing lately is, I'll see something online. I'll see something on, Instagram maybe or Twitter, or I'll hear somebody come up to me at church, somebody did this Sunday, Pastor, I need to pray for this. And, they were going on. I go, oh, great, let's pray right now. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pray for you right now. It's fresh. I'm not going to let you walk away and then I'm going to forget. Mm-hmm. So just, pray right then. So when stuff comes to your mind, just pray it. But I like what Bobby said, I love, and I used to do that very faithfully, and I have not had the consistency that I used to have, where I would pray each day of the week. I would have a specific thing that I would try to focus mostly on, And, but I've been thinking even like, I need to get back into that habit, because I do agree there is an intentional thing that is very helpful. So you can actually keep track of not only what you're praying about, but how God's responding.
Yeah, the victories that come from that.
Yeah. And when I used to do that most consistently, Phil, you and I run together sometimes. So on runs, I would have Monday, I'd pray for this on my run, Tuesday, I'd pray for that. And I can think, because I've been running for 12 years, so I can think of so many places, because I run pretty much the same place. I can think of it was right here, I was praying for this specific thing, and God did this. And, so that is all I'm saying, is it's good to have some sort of intentionality that you can keep track of things.
Yeah. Bobby?
I just, I like what you brought up about Paul, because and in some ways, Paul, I feel like Paul, at times I feel wrecked by him. because he lives like so radical that it can create this sense of pressure, and I'm going, that's not the way I'm supposed to look at it, because, it's in the scripture. But, he's like, I want to know him and share in his sufferings, even becoming like him in his death. And, you think, imagine showing up at a community group and someone says, I want to die a martyr's death. We'd think, what the heck are you doing? But that's Paul. And then when you read all his different prayers, it's like, if you were to just take every verse that Paul said about prayer and extract it from the Bible and then just read that. I never stop praying for you. I continue to pray for you. I pray for you night and day. You got a guy that doesn't sleep, and he's got this OCD relationship with prayer. So it can feel overwhelming, but you have to step back, I think, and catch what you said, Brian. I think that the spirit of it is, here's a man who is very burdened by prayer, and he talks a lot of it. But I think that the vision that we have of him at times, it looks like he's just never stops praying. Like there's nothing else that he does. And I'm like, golly, we got lawns to be mowed, weeds to pick, smoothies to make, it's like, okay, pray without ceasing, have an attitude of prayer, but it can be a lot.
And don't forget to pray for the smoothie before you drink it.
Every straw suck.
Yes. Any other thoughts, guys?
Probably, but we should maybe move on.
Yeah.
We could always obsess more.
No way.
I've always loved this. I read this story years ago. There was a famous pioneer missionary to China. His name was Hudson Taylor, and he founded the China Inland Missions back in the mid-1800s. And when he retired and then eventually, died, there was a guy who succeeded him in the leadership, and his name was, D.E. Host. Everybody went by their initials back in those days, D.E. Host. But D.E. Host, in the biography I read about him, he was one of those kind of guys who would be talking to you, and then suddenly he'd be talking to God at the same time. And you kind of were suddenly like, wait, what? Who? And he would just go, he flowed into prayer just so naturally. And I've always thought, gosh, I'd love that.
Yeah.
I wish I could have that kind of a flow in my prayer life.
Watchman Nee was like that too.
Man,
so that he was always talking to you and then praying. And then it just kind of overlapped.
Yeah.
And by the way, just because I know we only got a few more seconds left, Brian mentioned that we'll go running together and we'll pray. He does a lot of the praying because I'm trying to run. I'm running, and Brian will do the praying for us.
No, I didn't mean that we run and pray together. I just meant we run together, and you can identify.
And there's because you were
when
talking.
we did run, I would pray for you because I wondered if you were going to make it.
Would you make it? Can you please, Lord, please help him to go faster?
That's not true. That's not
sure
true.
Is wheezing a lot.
We better. You're younger than me and faster than me, but I don't think you can run further.
Probably not. Not anymore.
Well,
I know
now
I
you could. Anybody could, but.
All right, Sandra, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. We're coming up to our break, so I won't take another call until we come back in just a few minutes. But if you're listening to us on the radio on Good Friday 2023, we are not live. We recorded this episode yesterday. Now, yesterday being Thursday, the 6th, if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, you can call us until 5 p.m. Pacific time. The number is right there on the bottom of your screen. And we sure do hope to see you at Good Friday or Easter services this weekend. I know Calvary Costa Mesa's Sunday services will be at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's the sunrise service. And then 2 services at 8:30 and 11. And an Easter egg hunt for the kids at 10. Phil Metzger, what are you guys doing at Calvary San Diego for Easter?
Good Friday, and then Sunday morning Easter, 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock.
9 and 11. Very good. So we'll be back in just a little bit with more of your questions on Pastor's Perspective. We're back on Pastor's Perspective on Good Friday. That is when you are listening to this episode on the radio. It is not live. We recorded it on previous day, Thursday the 6th. So if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube on Thursday the 6th, you can call us. The number's right there on the bottom of your screen. If you're listening on Friday, nobody's here to answer your questions, so write them down so you don't forget them, and then call us on Monday. That's when we're going to be live. We're normally not live on Mondays, but we will be this coming Monday. And answering your questions today, we've got Brian Broderson, Bobby Conway, and Phil Metzger. Brian and Phil are here in the studio with me. Bobby is in Charlotte, North Carolina, but will be soon here in Southern California. It'll be good to see Bobby in the studio for a few days, and we can't wait to see him. So, back to the phones, guys. Yes?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yep.
Christopher in California. How can we help you?
Hi, can you hear me?
Of course we can.
All right, thank you for taking my call. So my question is, I'm wondering about the rapture and children that are, under the age of accountability. If the child is in the home that is not a faith home or their parents aren't believers, do they get raptured? I like to believe that the Lord is going to just rapture all the children. I have 2 kids of my own, so it's really it hurts knowing that, what if the kids do get left behind? So I was just curious on that.
Phil Metzger, what say you?
Yeah. Fun question, Christopher. I think because there's not one verse that's going to say, here's the answer. Some Bible questions, we just say, I don't know about this. And then there's a verse for that. That's great. So this one requires a little bit of piecing a few different thoughts together, all biblical, I promise. The most important is what you just said. Could you imagine a scenario where 2 parents would be raptured? Again, for those that are believing that we're waiting for the rapture to come, can you imagine the rapture happening and then 2 underage, 2 minors, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old being left in that home alone? Does that fit with the character of God? So you got to go back to the character of God where there's not a verse that just says, this is a specific answer. And so the character of God tells us there's no way he would ever leave these little kids just alone in a home in that way. So that leads me to say, yes, kids that are under that age of accountability will be raptured. They will not be left alone in a home by themselves. That goes against the character of God.
And what is the age of accountability? Brian?
Well, that's another question altogether. Nobody knows. I mean, there is some indication in Scripture that there is a point where that does become a reality. In the Jewish community, they have what is called a bar mitzvah. If it's a boy, if it's a girl, it's a bas mitzvah. And that is really kind of a transition out of childhood into adulthood and seen as somewhat of an age of accountability, right?
Yeah, totally.
12, 13 years old.
And don't you think, too, the reason we can't put a date on that is you think of a young man who maybe has special needs, is autistic. Yeah. Now you're talking about a whole nother scenario. Yeah. This is 38 and not at that age.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good point that you're making there, Brian. That, we follow that kind of idea, 12, 13, 14 in that range. But
and like you're saying, but not even going to a place of even something like autism, although that's kind of a whole nother category, which I think falls into the under the age of accountability for the most part.
Yeah.
But then you just think of people's maturity levels. And, you meet people that are 15 with a maturity level of a 9-year-old, and people that are 10 with a maturity level of a 15-year-old.
Yep. So true.
Yeah, I think these are the kinds of things that God only knows. And I want to err on the side of mercy and grace, like you said. Yeah. I mean, I believe all children are going to the rapture.
Yeah.
Could
you imagine a kid being left at home? I choose to believe it. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Christopher, thanks for your call today on Pastor's Perspective. Now we'll talk to Steve in California. What's up, Steve?
Oh, I'm on. Hi.
Hi there. What's your question?
Okay. Actually, 2, but having to do with the same verses. In Deuteronomy, where it says God is a jealous God. And then in 1 Corinthians, where it says love is not jealous. There's something to do with the Hebrew and the Greek there, or I just need to contextualize it right, or?
Yeah, so what's the deal with jealousy? Bobby, what do you say to Steve?
That's a great question, Bud. One of the things that can help us with this is to realize that when it comes to emotions like jealousy, anger, impatience, that there is a holy and an unholy side. So when Jesus is flipping tables, at the temple, that's God's holy, righteous anger. So we're told, be angry and do not sin. In other words, there's a way to be angry and to not sin. There's a righteous jealousy and there's an unrighteous jealousy. So an unrighteous jealousy often ensues when you want something that doesn't belong to you, and it's coupled with envy. A righteous jealousy is the kind that God has for us. He doesn't want us worshiping other gods. He wants us to worship Him. Similarly, we can all imagine that those of us that are in love or married, that if our spouse, was starting to get feelings for somebody else and you saw something sparking, it would be good for us to have a holy jealousy. So there's a fine line when us as humans have a righteous anger and it turns to unrighteous. We tend to always want to see the anger and the emotions we feel in the best possible light, but we do cross lines, but God doesn't. So that's the way that you understand that. When the Bible refers to God's anger, it's a righteous anger. His wrath is a righteous wrath. His jealousy is a righteous jealousy. In other words, it's pretty cool to think that God gets stirred up when we are turning to lesser things in life to find satisfaction when He is the ultimate, and He wants us to be fully devoted and fully in love with Him. And, He tells us how He feels about it.
Steve, thank you for calling us today on Pastor's Perspective. Let's take an Easter question here from Vicky in California. Hi there, Vicky.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
You bet.
I was calling about the scripture where he says, Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I think I've heard a couple of times where it was it's supposedly doesn't mean that Jesus was being separated from the Father because He's God, so that can't be. But so I don't fully understand what was happening spiritually then, where He was being forsaken.
What do you say, Phil?
Thanks for asking the question, Vicky. There's, we remember that Jesus is fully God and fully man. And so at this moment, He's taking on the sins of the world. And so there's these two parts of, this humanity and divinity. And He, the Bible tells us that sin separates us from God. And so He's taking upon Himself the punishment and the separation that we deserve, because we are sinners. We were born in sin, and then we've continued in that. And so Jesus cries out, why have you forsaken me? It's not so much like, again, to the point that Bobby just made a minute ago about like verbiage and language and how it's used. It's not so much this idea that like the way we would use the same words, but this idea of like, I am taking on everything right now. And this is the moment. And so He is both man and God taking upon our sins and paying for them for each one of us.
Brian, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think in the end, obviously, like Phil just said, there's the two natures with Jesus. There's the human nature and the divine nature. And I think it's crystal clear that it's in His divine nature that in His human nature that He's forsaken. He's hanging on a cross. He's cursed according to the law of Moses. And so He very much senses that abandonment by God as a human being at this time. just exactly what's transpiring in the realm of his divinity is very hard, if not impossible, to conclude. Like you said in the beginning, Vicki, you don't have a separating of God from God, because that's not even possible. So that God is who he is eternally, and there's not, some people have put it, there's not a tear in the Trinity. The Trinity is not torn apart at the crucifixion, which I think is absolutely the case. But on the other hand, there is something going on in the spiritual side of things as well, because Hebrews tells us that Christ offered himself through the eternal Spirit to God. He offered himself as a spotless sacrifice. But it's interesting, he offered himself through the eternal Spirit. Mm-hmm. So there's something happening where Jesus is bearing the judgment of sin, the judgment of sin is separation from God. And so this is the part of the mystery that nobody in 2,000 years has been able to say, oh, this is exactly what was happening. Nor will anybody.
No, this is more about like the anguish of the moment than it is what's specifically happening here.
Yeah, and if you think of, Jesus is quoting Psalm 22, and if you go back, and I think, from a practical standpoint, that was the intention. People are there at the foot of the cross. They hear Jesus say, my God, why have you forsaken me? They're like, oh, wait, I read that somewhere before. They go back and they read the 22nd Psalm, and they see, they've pierced my hands and my feet. They divided my garments among them. That's all right there in Psalm 22.
That would have been shocking, right?
Well, my God, it would have been completely mind-blowing. But then the Psalm goes on, and the sufferer is talking about the fact that, but you are with me and you're delivering me. So there's not, again, this, and I even years ago, I would teach that somehow there was a God and Christ separated for the first time in all eternity. And I had to come to a point and realize, wait, okay, I think that's wrong. That's the wrong view. So
that's more like, again, that human idea of they were separated, but they can't be separated. Yeah. Exactly. But humanly speaking, there is a lot of anguish.
Yeah, from the human standpoint, they are separated.
Totally.
Yeah.
And Vicki, I think you had another question?
Yeah. So in Genesis, when Adam and Eve, when they sinned, when they ate the forbidden fruit, I don't fully understand. I mean, I understand. So before they ate the fruit, they were unclothed, and then after they ate the fruit, they realized that they were unclothed. But I don't understand how sin, why, what did sin do that now that was bad? Because it wasn't bad before, but now it's bad after. So I just didn't understand that exactly.
Bobby Conway, what do you think?
Think of it like shame. I think that after, they rebel against God, they are aware now that something's different. And so when they're clothing themselves, in other words, they were naked and unashamed, so they sought to dress themselves to feel no shame, to get rid of the shame. So I think it's all about the shame. It's not like they would have been doing anything wrong once they took the leaves off. They would have taken the leaves off, right? I mean, their husband and wife, they got booted out of the garden, but God gave them garments to wear. But it doesn't mean that every time they were naked that they felt shameful. It's just showing that they didn't know what to do with the guilt when it fell upon them. And so not knowing what to do with the guilt, they thought, well, maybe it has to do with the fact that we're naked, because now we realize that we're naked. But really what their nakedness symbolizes is that they've been exposed for what they've done, that God sees them. And what they were trying to cover, I think through leaves symbolically pointed to the deeper issue of the guilt and the shame that they had now inherited.
Phil Metzger?
I was just saying, I love that, Bobby. And I was thinking too, that's the moment when humanity became completely self-centered. We were God-centered, God-fixed. We were completely oblivious to our own self-centeredness for a little window of time, however long that was. But when sin entered the world, shame, I love that. I don't love shame, but I love the concept there. It's so powerful. But I also think too, like, it's like we just became this is sin. I'm hyper aware of me. And now from that moment to the rest of now, we are all looking and thinking about how it impacts me. It's all about me. And this is sinful nature.
Brian?
Yeah.
No, good, great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. Vicki, thank you for your questions today on Pastor's Perspective. If you're listening on the radio on Good Friday, we're not live. Don't call us with your questions, but we'll be back live on Monday. We'd love to hear from you then. Trevor's got a Easter-themed question. What did you want to know? Go ahead, Trevor. You had a question about Barabbas?
Yeah, I was just, thank you guys for taking the call, though, and I must commend you guys on your program because I find out that you're very, very well studied, all of you, everybody on this program. But
Thank you, Trevor.
I was curious about what exactly happened. If anything is authentically written about what happened to Barabbas when he was released.
Brian?
There's nothing, authoritatively written that we would quote as a source to say, yeah, this is a reliable source and they said this. I don't know. I'm sure somebody wrote something. And I remember, seeing a movie when I was a kid, Barabbas. Anthony Quinn starred in the movie as Barabbas. And so, they had their embellished accounts and things like that. But I don't know of even any specific extra-biblical literature that would make reference to Barabbas.
I found a couple. Though again, none of this is like, it's not the Bible. This is just, it's the Gospel of Nicodemus and the Acts of Pilate.
Yes.
And again, when were these, was this written in 1984 or I have no idea. I'm just saying those are the two. Other than that, there's like nothing in at all. So Anthony Quinn's as close to that as anything else.
Yeah, watch the movie.
Bobby?
That's a great question. I mean, Barabbas, it's an Aramaic name, means son of the father. Abba. So I think the question that was asked there, though, Trevor, isn't it interesting? Unless the Bible records the death, what you're asking is what's the rest of the story? And so if you think about how many characters that we have in the Bible, we have 1,189 chapters in the Bible. And then if you were to think about how many personalities are talked about in the Bible, right? Tens of thousands. How many of those personalities do we have their death recorded? Well, then those where we don't have their death recorded, we're left with what's the rest of the story, Barabbas. And so there's so much that we just don't know.
That is fascinating to think. I wonder, somebody must have done this at some point.
Yeah,
figured out how many people are named in the Bible.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about
if not Bobby's going to do it, you just ruined Bobby's night.
It's Bobby.
My PhD thesis.
His second PhD is going to be on all the names of the Bible.
Pecking of the chickens, and then number 2.
So according to a quick inquiry online, 3,237 different people, which doesn't seem like a lot. Do you think that seems low? But maybe not.
That does seem low to me.
Yeah.
Well, does that count like the Arameans as one character? Do you know what I mean? Like, people groups and all.
What do you think, Trevor?
I'm having a hard time believing that because a third of that amount we have in chapters. And so if you have 1,189 chapters, but then you think about how many genealogies that we have. I mean, you check out on your Bible reading plan once you arrive at 1 Chronicles chapter 1. By the time you're at chapter 9, you're ready to jump off a cliff. I mean, it's just genealogy after genealogy. But hey, that's perhaps right. But then even let's say that if there's 3,000, how many of So now the person needs to do an extra project, right? Well, how many of those people do we have that recorded deaths? And then what does the extant literature have to say about that? And
all right. We'll expect all that information from you, Bobby.
On Monday.
Next week.
What do you think, Trevor?
Next week.
No, I was just curious. We were talking about that, the fact that Barabbas is pretty much like we are these days, because Jesus died in his place, just like he died in our place.
That's right.
But I was just wondering if anything, maybe Josephus or one of those guys might have written something. I was just wondering if anything was authentically written, because I understand Barabbas' name is the son of the father, but nobody even knows who his father is. So I was just wondering if there was anything whatsoever. I know I've never seen anything else written about him in the Bible, but I was just wondering. I know you guys are scholars and things. So I was just wondering if you guys had any information about if anything whatsoever was authentically written about what happened to Barabbas after that.
Yeah, like I said, I was wondering, Bobby, the thought crossed my mind, and Phil, Eusebius. Did Eusebius in his ecclesiastical history, did he make any references? Because I think he's the oldest church historian that we have on record, right? So if anybody would have, it seems like Josephus isn't going to. Josephus rarely mentions Jesus and John the Baptist.
Eusebius does.
Eusebius does?
Yeah, I just checked it. Yeah, Book 1, Chapter 11, Church History. He recounts the events leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus, including the choice presented to the crowd that Pilate gave, either Jesus or Barabbas. He notes that the people chose to release Barabbas.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And then where did Barabbas go after that?
Well, Eusebius doesn't get into that. So he says that
he
was
stuck to the Bible.
Yeah. But he basically just requotes the Gospels. And he mentions them briefly in another book called Gospel Problems and Solutions. Nope. And he discusses discrepancies between certain Gospel accounts.
Interesting.
Right? There we go.
Wow.
Okay. Well, we tracked down the source. But
by the way, I told you guys, I just finished reading his history when I was in California, and it was such an easy read for those out there. Like, because when I first started hearing about like these church fathers and stuff, you're thinking, oh man, they're going to be writing in such a way it's going to be. Is it going to be just dry and boring? That is a short, good read that doesn't take long, and they even have it on Audible. And so for our listeners, if they've never read Eusebius and the history of the church, it's great. But the thing that Trevor got me thinking is, isn't it interesting with Barabbas, Jesus, he dies in his place. And I guess the question is that we're all going to be curious about in heaven. Here's a question, that we'd want to know is, did he end up believing in Jesus, right? That because this was like an ultimate physical substitute. Yeah. But little did Barabbas realize that he was getting kind of a double offer here. Not only was Jesus sentencing him from his physical crime, but he could have been freed from his spiritual crime.
Yeah.
I hope he's in heaven. Wouldn't that be cool? Golly.
I do too.
What a testimony.
Totally. Trevor, thanks for your phone call today. We have such smart listeners who call us with these amazing questions. Gina from California, what did you want to know? Hey, Gina, go ahead. Well, Gina's question, I'll read it off the screen here. Where does it say in the Bible that once you die, you cannot accept Jesus? Brian.
Hebrews 9:27, is it?
27.
It is appointed to a person to die once, and after death, the judgment. So there's a judgment after death. There's no further opportunity to, get your life right. Isaiah 55 says, seek the Lord while he may be found, call upon him while he is near. It's implied that he's not always going to be able to be found. And of course, that would be after one dies.
So today is the day of salvation. What do you tell somebody that's listening right now wondering what that's all about?
Yeah, and that, Paul picks that up in the New Testament in Corinthians. He says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart. So today is the day of salvation. The idea that I'm going to I'm going to wait. I hear what you're saying. This could be true, but I've got a lot of things I want to do. I'm going to wait till I'm older. All of those kinds of things. You literally have no guarantee that you're going to make it to dinner tonight. That's the reality. Right. So this is an urgent, a matter of utmost urgency, and you need to respond now.
Call upon the Lord right now, and you can learn more about it at calvarychapel.com. Go there and click where it says How to Know God. And we'd love to hear from you. You can contact us there on the bottom of your screen. We are out of time for today on Good Friday. We hope to see you at church on Sunday, every Sunday, but this Sunday being Easter Sunday, maybe you can catch a sunrise service. Calvary Chapel Costa Mesas is at 6 a.m. We'd love to see you there. For Brian Broderson, Bobby Conway, and Phil Metzger, I'm Brian Perez, and Pastor's Perspective was sponsored by Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa.